Well, glad to see you all again today. It's the Four Amigos. We've got the whole team here today, the Four Consulting Amigos. And today we're going to talk a little bit about, and we're going to continue on with our discussion last week. And we're going to talk a little bit today about, um, after customers last week, we're going to talk about competitors and determining who your competitors are and we'll talk later in a future edition about what to do about some of that stuff and what kind of a strategy comes out of that. So let's kind of get into it. And a little bit about what we can do there. Now, there's a little reminder that I need to kind of go through for those who maybe haven't seen the last couple of episodes. Um, First of all, the PIMS principles. You've got the PIMS principles tell us that you need to be the market leader in order to be able to maintain and have the best opportunity at your margins. And they also say that the top two companies get most of the business. Well, the largest one is 40 to 50% of the market. The next one is about 25%. And then the third, which is not a great place to be, but it's certainly better than being underneath that. That's about 12%. So that means that all the rest of the competitors, who knows, there may be 50 competitors, 10 competitors, they have to split up the remaining 15%. So that's why it's so important to understand these principles and to be able to figure out who your competitors are so you have a chance of actually attaining the number one or number two spot. Then you've also got, this is a separate issue, but this kind of corroborates it, the 80-20 rule, which basically says that 20% of the companies will do about 80% of the business. And there you go. I mean, the PIMS principles through research, it shows that you're talking about 65, 75, 80% of the business. It's very, very close. So it's really important to understand your competitors so that you can get your share of the business and compete effectively against them. So this was the little diagram that we went through last time, and the sweet spot shows up right there with that triangle. And so it's really this relationship of customer types um, in interfacing with competition. You're going to have some overlap in the marketplace with competition, and then the overlap of your core competencies between the competition and your company. And so that leaves this really, really great spot. You're going to do some business where you're sharing with your competition, but your sweet spot is, where your competencies really line up with the customers. So with that in mind, let's just talk a little bit about this competitive analysis concept. What does it really mean, and how do you go about it? First of all, there are physical characteristics. These are the things you want to find out when you're doing an analysis. That includes things like what are their sales. You can't always figure out what a competitor's sales revenue is, but you want to try that to if you can. The number of employees, the geographic reach, physically, what are their facilities like if you're in manufacturing? That's a lot more important, and even to the point of, well, what machinery do they have? So there's a lot of those physical things that are just there. It might be number of delivery vehicles, things that are important in your industry that makes your business better. Well, what do the competitors have to make that comparison with? And then product characteristics, do they make a very fine quality? Is the servicing of that good? And what kind of pricing do they typically have? And are you competing exactly with is it product for product? Are you competing on price? Are you competing on quality and service, et cetera? What are the ways that you're interfacing or comparing their products with your products? The third one that really, the third one is a repeat. Sorry about that. I'm not sure that's a mistake. The fourth one, or actually the third one, is the market approach. And that includes marketing positioning. We've talked about that here. We won't go into that, but if you don't understand marketing positioning or emplacement, you need to if you're going to properly compete against someone. And what kind of messaging? Now we're talking about your competitors' positioning and your competitors' messaging and what media do they use, et cetera. And finally, what kind of a customer experience do the customers of your competitors actually have, including reputation, the strength of their brand, et cetera. So those are the things that you want to look at when you're making a comparison. Now, here are some of the things. This is a little bit of a touch about strategy, and that is that when you're if depending on where your Prado um, ratio comes in and how many of your customer, within this is now back looking at your own company compared to other companies, although it's really impossible to get this information from your competitor. But it's important to know if 5% of your customers are giving you 95% of your business, you've got a really serious risk of an interruption in revenue because you could lose one of those big gorillas we call them. But they can also hold you hostage and force lower prices. So an awful lot of the time, when you have a ratio like this, you've got a price problem because they're too big to lose. And so that's the problem with having your customer mix like this. If you have a few more customers, generating 90% of their business, that can be an indication that you really need to be working on developing more customers of, say, that size or of more of a normal size. In other words, sometimes you go after the big guys and it throws off the mix and it makes you vulnerable to loss. So here we are as a normal company where 80% of your business comes from 20% of your customers. And this ratio doesn't always mean that you're going to be healthy, but at least it gives you a sense that you're going to have a reasonable turnover and it gives you an opportunity to have a healthy kind of margin on your products. And then, of course, when you're lower, it's kind of a safe place where 30% of your customers are doing 70% of your volume. That's a kind of a safe place to be regarding stability of your company. But it also might point to not stretching very far to get into new and different kinds of things. So out of this competitive comparison, these are the kinds of things that we hope to look at. And so lastly, the question I always get from clients is, well, how do I do this? It has been very, very difficult to do historically for the last from 5 years ago, 4 years ago, till all the way back to be able to do this. But here are a couple of places you can get some information. First of all, the county business pattern. Now, this is a census of businesses, and you can get all of this stuff online at the U.S. Census Bureau. And you look up the report on the county business patterns, and it will tell you how many customers now it won't tell you the name of the competitor, but it will tell you the averages, how many businesses are in a certain what they call SIC code, or it's NACIS code now. They've changed the name. But you look at the category of business, and then you can be able to determine things like revenue of that particular industry, how many total employers there are, and some other interesting information that sometimes is valuable, like how many square feet, that kind of thing. Then you can get current trends on these same things just by simply going to the census.gov econ/current data, and that'll give you some additional information. Now, if you're trying to get a count for how many competitors you have in, say, a region, you can do that on private services like InfoUSA, for instance. I think they've changed their name now. but you still can get there by simply going to infousa.com, and they will allow you to do what's called a count. Without, it's a business list service, and you can actually buy a list if you want. But in order to determine a market size, it's very valuable to be able to simply type in, here's the industry, the sub-industry, and sub-industry sometimes, and I'm looking for this geographic location. And then several other things like, is it a private business? Is it a public business? Et cetera, et cetera. And you can really literally do a count where you can see how big your competitive landscape really is in a particular industry. So you can just go in there and mess around with that a little bit and actually find that information. So that's pretty good. Now I've done this kind of thing for many years. It's a frustrating kind of thing to do, to be able to get this information on competitive analysis. But these are some of the places you can go. Then there's another way of doing it with the internet, and that's simply to uh, do some competitive website analyses on registered pages on the internet. And then you can also use keywords to find things like um, what kinds of capabilities does a company have? We'll talk more about capabilities next time. But you can really find a lot of stuff out by simply doing research, Google search analysis. If you carefully hone that down, then you can go through and take that information and you build that out on a spreadsheet so that you can compare everything. And then, of course, another way to do this is by including on your customer feedback services, which we talked about in our customer section last week. In your customer surveys, you can ask questions like, do you use this competitor? What do you think about? Here's a list of competitors, rank them. You don't have to say they're competitors. A list of companies, rank them. Or do you know about them? Have you heard of them? A variety of questions was a customer to give you feedback, and do they know it? Do they understand their products? Are there any favorite things that they do? Whatever you're really trying to accomplish, you just build that into your customer surveys, and then you can begin to collect that information over time. And of course, sales interviews. By that, we're talking about going to your sales team and asking these questions. Salespeople innately are dealing with competitive statements like, well, I can buy that from so and so cheaper. Uh, or that sort of dialogue. And believe me, salespeople are very sensitive to getting turned down, and they'd like to know why. Many of those excuses are not actually real; they're just excuses. So you have to use judgment to determine what's real and what's not real. So these are some of the ways you can do it. But as I said, it's a difficult kind of thing to do. I have used it very successfully in several different areas. One example is an industrial company that had a basic product, and that product was useful across many different industries. So I was able to go in and search each of the industries that they did business with and collect how many companies were actually out there to determine where the competitors were, and then and by the same token, how big the market was in terms of finding people of like, sort of bird of a feather kind of thing, because that's the stuff you can get. It can be challenging, or you could ask Chat GPT. So this is the thing I think that is for me, it's very exciting, and I don't use it like I used to. I mean, I don't do competitive analyses like I used to. In fact, I very rarely do them nowadays, being mostly retired. However, I would have loved to have had Chat GPT to be able to solve these issues. And you can really do some terrific stuff using Chat GPT. And you can find out a lot of information about a marketplace and about competitors, about specific products. It's really like the information is out there, and all you have to do is either go look for it appropriately through through search, or just go to chat and you ask the questions, and they'll come up with some really, really good stuff. So this is a good time just to mention to people, please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this, and that will do for right now and just in terms of the basic outline. So I discovered some interesting things about John's business using Chat GPT. And it's interesting because I discovered that while I found his competitors in Redlands, there are also a couple of competitors that Chat could not distinguish from others. For instance, John rents small offices to one, two, three, maybe four people in a small company, uh, uh, and including the services, et cetera, and a few other things that we've talked about, several times. Um, and therefore, you would expect things like executive offices and that sort of thing to pop up, and they did. But there's a new marketplace for these rooms where you rent a chair and a table and you work with a bunch of people in the room. And one of them here in town is called the Orange Room. Now, John, you probably know all about that.
It's been around for a couple of 3 years.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
But
a non-private open space for
yeah,
people who want to go and have other people listen to their conversations.
right. Well, I never exactly. It's for people who want to lower their productivity, I think. It's like,
Well, there was a tendency for it, and we haven't had too much competition from it in the sense that it's a whole different segment. It's a
yeah,
coffee shop.
it
It's a
is.
coffee shop with,
Yeah,
and that's not what
yeah,
we ever have done, because we have people who actually want a private space. They want to put a key in the door and they want to lock something down and
yeah,
they want to leave their
absolutely.
computer there and go home and come back the next day and do it, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't really see them as a direct competitor, but in a way that there is some competition there for somebody who's really only, wants to do this two or three times a week or
Well,
something.
and so's Starbucks, and
Yeah.
so's Panera. We've got people at Panera who, they
Yeah.
get a sip club from Panera and they sit in the back, 3 hours a day, and that's what they do. And there's
Yeah.
actually in our town, we've got the local high school that they have groups come over from the high school after, and they just sit there and they do their homework together.
Yeah. It kind of makes you wonder how you make money with people who buy one cup of coffee and nurse it all day long.
Well,
Uh,
then the other thing is the unintended consequence of all that, which is interesting, is that you end up with personnel that are keeping the place secure, keeping it open, cleaning the tables. You're actually, the service staff are doing more work for less revenue. And our model is a little different. We want to minimize the number of people that we employ to the very minimum so that, we can keep our prices low so that our clients don't have to pay for that overhead because we don't need the overhead.
Oh, of course. And you're right. If you're going to add services like that, and there's another auxiliary business that I discovered that I've never heard of, and that is companies that are renting other people's offices to people who want a place to sit. In other words, it's sort of like an RVRO where you can rent an empty desk to somebody who's going to come in and sit down and do work in your office. I had never even heard of that kind of thing. I could never imagine that kind of thing. But I suppose if you have extra spaces, I suppose that you might, gain a little bit of revenue, 20, $30 a day or whatever it is. So there's an auxiliary competitor You've got two auxiliary competitors that, yeah, you're right. They're not really direct competitors. My point is that ChatGPT was not able to distinguish
Yeah.
between them, and therefore it showed up in the conversation I had about your business.
Well, I've got a case history that I'd like to share with you guys that is black and white in terms of our conversation, I think. And it's one that I was intimately involved with. We were manufacturers, agents, and engineering designers for AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, in the late 1980s through the 1990s. And our arch enemy rival was Intel. At that point, the computer revolution was going on in America, around the world. Intel had 90% of sales in the 1990s. AMD had 10%.
Yeah.
Intel stock was in the 60s and 70s. AMD stock was sub $10. I bought and sold a lot of AMD stock over the years. We would get design wins, massive design wins, in the military programs, in automotive programs. One of the biggest ones we got was IBM, the first full color printer they put out that was desk size, that one you could pick up and carry. Had a AMD 29,000 processor in it. It was a 32-bit RISC processor. You can tell the language comes back. Anyway, what's interesting is it was always a frustration because there was a marketing mindset that went on, and Intel spent millions of dollars on Wall Street. Intel Inside,
That's right.
and it was the whole plan that they did was marketing based. You can't go wrong with Intel, and they were pushing to the consumer to know that if it had Intel inside, it was a good product. And
It was a
AMD,
brilliant campaign, by the way.
well, it was a brilliant campaign. It worked
Yeah,
exceptionally well and was very frustrating for people like me.
yeah, I
AMD
bet.
was an engineering company that came in behind, had slightly different product lines, but based off the same 486, 586, etc. architecture that Intel had. So they had deviations of it, and it was like they were pushing their engineering expertise, the micro, whatever the size was of their wafers, whatever the heat dissipate. And the market did not care. Well, the 90s, Intel was 90%, AMD was 10%. In the 2003, AMD took, Intel was at 75%, AMD went from 20 to 25 to 30%. Uh,
Wow.
and then all of a sudden they lost that edge. And then in 2018, um, and AMD went down to 5% in 2010. In 2018, they had a new product line, they had a new CEO, and AMD went back to 25%. Today, they're now at 40%. In fact, if you actually have a look at it right now, their market cap surpassed Intel's a few
Hmm.
years ago. It's not right there now. Beautiful graphs here. But the deal was the marketing shift. It started from an engineering based to now it's not we're not the cheapest, but we're the best. We're the best power performance, and their marketing has now gone out to the point where they're on the AI marketplace and they are actually saying we're a better high performance computing chip. And so they've changed completely and they're growing their market share. And Intel is now in almost second seat. So it's a big comeback. It is a big battleground and it's a marketing battleground right now.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. The recent fall of Intel has been that they kind of stopped innovating. And while the Intel Inside was a fabulous campaign, branding
In the
campaign
1990s.
in the 1990s, why? Why did that work? Because individuals were buying their own computers at that point, and they didn't know really how to evaluate. And so Intel did such a terrific job that people felt better about it if they had an Intel chip on the inside. And so that would actually get them to buy a certain computer, Dell over Compaq or whatever the case may be. And that worked out incredibly well. But over several years in between, these other companies, AMD and included, began to engineer better chips and make some changes, as I understand it. And what happened is that their market changed because now they're going into cloud computing, and engineers are now making the decisions. So their market changed from a consumer market to an industrial market where professionals are making their decisions. So I don't think and if you can't keep up with engineering, no amount of branding is going to help. And so they've basically been doing poorly until Trump came along and said, "Oh, we're going to pick you to do some of these new things." And now Intel is doing some incredible expansion with all the latest uh, chip manufacturing machines and so forth. So they're going to come back, but they learned a really tough lesson. And that is in that industry, you better stay up with the innovation or you're going to lose market share. Yeah, yeah. Good
So,
example.
just out of curiosity, I just did a quick comparison of the do-it-yourself slash kit type computers versus the OEM integrated services, and the OEM integrated product is growing, and that's pretty much the way it's been. So the in terms of the OEM, it's growing a little bit. There is some still custom stuff going on. I'd say it'd be at the high end of the custom because they got so expensive. And that
Mhm.
would be the guys who put together multiple racks and they design systems to do that. So it's kind of growing from you and I going down Radio Shack and buying a
Yeah,
motherboard and a power supply and putting it
yeah,
together because that's what I used to do. So now it's a very integrated process.
yeah. There. That it is. Ray, did you ever get involved in any of this comparing competitors with your clients?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And it had to be at that point, it was from our point of view, we would just go and talk about specifics, MIPS, BIPS, whatever the turn rate is, heat, long lastedness, etc. So it was all about very engineering based specifics. It
Yeah,
really wasn't about supply chain. It wasn't about capacity to support ramp. Um, so, and it wasn't about the deviations of firmware or software that would be used in future for it. It was all really about hardware performance. And
and
of
then
course,
yeah, and in that case, it's all about watching your competitors and trying to anticipate what they're doing so you can get there before they can. And the AI business right now, that's going on all the time, and everybody's got everybody else's product.
so one of
So
the things that
they
came
can
out in the middle
really
of that,
determine, what their competitors are doing.
one of the game changers back in the 90s was a shift towards application specific ICs, where it was possible for a particular volume application to build its own integrated chipset using a combination of chips so that would become a specific application IC as opposed to having discrete components flopping around. I mean, the
Yeah,
government did it for a long time, but it wasn't affordable or able to be done for consumer electronics. For example, for IBM uh, typewriters that now became printers, or for machines that dispensed liquids and French fries, and I mean the whole McDonald's French fry business and the whole back end of their operation now is dependent on a huge series of electronic components that there's fewer people and far more machinery, and they're really good at what they do.
yeah.
And so that kind of came into the middle of it. So,
Ray, same question for you. Did you ever spend any time in comparing? You did an awful lot of inside stuff, internal stuff with employees and management. Did you ever get involved in the competitive analysis side of things? Ray,
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking to John.
yeah, no, I'm switching to you.
Oh, okay.
And
No,
Ed, either one.
well, we did. I had a client that was remanufacturing transmissions for Honda actually, and we did a comparative analysis there to try to find out whether it was more beneficial to continue along that vein or expand to other transmissions. And ultimately, when we got done, it didn't make a lot of sense to move into other um, car types. It was better to stick with what they were doing and grow from inside than to try to do something else because of the challenges of having to build a whole new set of expertise to do Nissan or Toyota or whatever. So
Yeah,
that was
I
interesting.
remember. I remember that. And in that particular case, you were trying to grow the business, as I
Hmm.
recall. They were trying to grow the business, and they had this very specialized expertise with the Honda transmission, right?
Yes.
And so then the question is, well, is the business, and this goes back to a couple of our previous tapes, is the business, is the market big enough for them to grow within that? And I think it would be clear, yeah, of course it's going to be big enough to grow within that because there's almost an unlimited number of Hondas on the road, right? And so how many of those can you really get? As opposed to getting into a whole nother deal in terms of learning new things and creating capabilities in
Yeah.
a company that wouldn't necessarily bring them business right away. That's sort of a long-term deal because now you've got to be able to tell a whole bunch of customers, I guess, or people or resources that you're doing Toyota now. And,
Yeah.
and then do they trust you? Do they know you can do as good a job as you have done in the past? So that's a really, really good example of comparing all three of these things. It's like, your customers, your competitors, and collectively all of your core capabilities, because this was a case where they determined to keep their niche based on their capabilities. I think that was a wise decision because
Yeah.
so many times you get out of your sandbox and you don't really know what you're doing. So, Ed, I'm sure you've run into this too.
Well, number one priority on every one of my engagements is to get the client to better understand their competitors. And unfortunately, a lot of operators are so focused in their daily routines of their business, they don't spend any time, and it's not a high priority for them to understand who their competitors are. And we try to get them to even spend some time talking to them and developing a relationship that at least you're part of what's going on. You understand things, and that leads to all kinds of potential opportunities of partnerships, or if somebody was going to be selling their business. If you have that insight, you have an opportunity to get in to be able to further enhance your business. And it's really important to stay in the focus of your business with your expertise, because if you try to do something you're not good at, you're going to fail. Or a lot of times people try to expand their geography and they find out it's just not cost effective to do so. They're probably better suited to focus on increasing their business in their market rather than getting involved in a brand new market.
Mhm.
So, and then the other thing I'd like to mention in valuation, when you go in and try to value a company, it's really important to understand the risk. And the risk of a company where they have one or two big customers, and that's it.
Mm.
That is a significant risk, and you wonder whether that valuation is properly stated, because it's probably overstated because you're just looking at the numbers rather than the relationships. You
Mm.
want to buy a business and you want to value a business in a high way, by that has a lot of diversity with their customers. And I really like that 70-30% rule that you mentioned. That I
Yeah.
think that hits it right on the nose.
Yeah. You have done, in fact, I think you're certified on doing valuations of companies. Um, and you built a really sophisticated model that we used, with one client we worked on together. And um, does your model take the idea of number of customers or size of customers into account when you are doing the actual mathematics?
Well, when you're doing the numbers, not so much, but when you're looking at your cost of capital, and that's the way you come up with a present value of future cash flows. If you don't have a large diversification of customers, you have a lot of risk. Therefore, you would require a significantly higher return on discounting those cash flows to the present value.
Ah,
So it would have a significant impact on the valuation of your company.
yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's a very interesting, a very real example of what can happen if you're trying to sell your company and you haven't really considered, your customer mix and what can really happen.
Hmm.
I can see somebody making a deal where they come in and they say, "Hey, look, if of these three big companies here that are customers, if one of them leaves in 3 years, uh, you're gonna give us all of our money back."
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
that's very true. I mean, that would be a reasonable proposition, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah, that's right, right. Yeah, well, very good. Looking at your competitors is not a very sexy subject. It's like a little bit on the boring side, maybe, especially for entrepreneurs who are, building product and getting out there and doing it and et cetera. And so thinking about their competitors may not be in a real analytical way, may not be something they particularly enjoy doing. But I think it is pretty important to pay attention to your competition. And I know that, when I was in the retail business, I was really tuned in to the kinds of things that my competitors were doing and, how far away were they, in the same mall? Do they have the same products? Are they generally moving their product mix in the same direction that I was in or the direction I was going? And paying attention to the products in the competitor's store in that particular case was really key. And the reason is that literally, if I saw a competitor going a certain direction that I might have been thinking about going, I would many times look for a new direction. So when of course, you're changing your stuff 4 times a year. You got 4 ball games every year, and you're starting over, with brand new mix and all of that. So I would actually look to buy in the cracks, find product mixes that were outside of my competitors' say view, almost like building a moat strategy at the product level, so that if I had an exclusive on a certain kind of product, I couldn't have all of my competitors showing up because they really did copy me, um, especially the really big ones, the ones that were big enough so that they could buy some of everything that I bought, and they actually got the information from the reps and they would buy exactly what I bought so that whenever somebody went into their store, they would have all the products I had. And then they kind of go, well, why do we care about little independent guy? He's got the same stuff that the big guys have. There's no differentiation there anymore. So I would go out of my way to pay attention to what they were doing. And it became almost a daily, but certainly a monthly concern to figure out where they're going so that I can go a different place. And many times I believed in a certain direction, but I knew that that was going to get saturated by, say, 4 or 5 of the big guys surrounding my stores. And then it's sort of like, well, I'm not going to do what they do. I'm going to look for something new. Now, it made it very challenging, but we survived by being different. We didn't survive, by being the same as everybody else. And that really made a big difference. So it's different if you're if you've got a plumbing business, and you're repairing, say, homes, uh, and doing domestic service most of the time for the owner of the house, you probably tend to do most of the same things. And so your reputation and quality of work kind of follows you, and you're not out looking to do something new or different all the time. So a competitive analysis might seem a little strange, but I want to encourage even those people to look at the trends that their competitors are doing, to see if in fact you're keeping up. Are they selling things that are different? Are they doing different services? Are they buying equipment to work on systems that you can't work on because you haven't bought that equipment, et cetera? So I mean, I think it's just a much longer horizon. It might take years for something to change in that industry, but at the same time, you still have to differentiate yourself in some way. Much of that is branding and service. But you've got to figure out some way to do that unless you're so busy, but based on reputation and brand. And there are those people that fit that exactly. They just don't need any more business because they want to stay small. So, any closing thoughts? And we'll go from there. Good. Thank you. So this sets us up now to talk next time about capabilities. And I think that will bring us to something that's a little more interesting, because as we talk about that, we can combine the whole thing together, and it gets real interesting in terms of discovering strategy for your business. So till then, we will see you next time.
Next.
Well, good session.
Yeah.